Hi, everyone. Welcome to our weekly American Mussar community gathering. It is such a pleasure to see all of you today. We will be on our second week of Chesed in this Chesed centric Mussar cycle. So I invite you to close your eyes and relax, and we'll begin with a short meditation as we always do. So kind of get comfortable in your chair and take in a deep breath through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And again, inhale through the nose and hold. And exhale through the mouth and hold. And if thoughts should come into your head, just observe them and let them go. Like watching a car move past on the road. Now is not the time for solving problems. Right now, all you need to do is inhale through the nose and hold, and exhale through the mouth and hold. And on your next inhale, say to yourself, Shema, and on the exhale, listen. Shema, listen. In Shema, we're listening deeply, without judgment, without offering advice. In Shema, we are listening with an open heart. Shema, listen. And when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Well, to get us started with our discussion today, we have a quote, which I will put up in just a sec. The Midrash Ecclesiastes Rabbah, and may I have a volunteer to unmute and read this out loud, please?
I'll do it.
Okay, great.
Whomever exercises mercy where strictness is required will eventually be cruel where kindness is required. Midrash Ecclesiastes Rabbah 7:33.
Thank you, Sue. Okay, I'm going to stop the share and then I will cut and paste it into the chat. But as we're kind of going into our second week of Chesed, one of the ways Chesed is translated is as mercy. So I'm curious, what is your take on this quote? Do you agree, disagree? What does that bring up for you? There it is. Yeah, Wendy.
I'm so glad you put that quote up. That was my question for today, was that because Chesed, there's something that's come up for me that doing one thing would be Chesed for someone, but doing it would not be Chesed for another person. So I've had to make a decision, and is there hurt there? Is there something there's both good and bad, but that's exactly what it is. If you do something, if you have mercy when it's not the right timing, timing is what I was going to ask you about. So thanks for putting that up there.
Yeah, timing is everything. Unless you're in real estate, then location is everything. But nonetheless, timing is still everything. As a rabbi, we can bring up multiple points of view. Janet.
I think it's possible to be firm and kind. I don't see them as being opposed.
Absolutely.
I'm reminded of the directions given to a bus driver who was driving a bunch of us kids back to the city area from camp, and the camp director says, I expect you to be firm but kind.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Other thoughts or observations? Or how might this have shown up in your life or not? Yeah, Sue.
This reminds me of mercy and justice, because I
Mm.
feel like in Torah there's that balance between mercy and justice. Justice being the strictness, but
Mhm.
that's another way of saying it, of being just, and that, well, that requires, it can be being strict, but it's just another way of looking at it, I think. So it's important to have justice, and if there is no justice, I guess, is that what it's saying? It's saying that that'll be cruel. I mean, I think I'm trying to piece this together. So when I read this, it says, whoever exercises mercy where strictness is required will eventually be cruel. So if you're merciful when you're supposed to be just, you're cruel. But then I kind of got lost with where kindness is required. So maybe you could explain that. What are they saying about kindness in this related to mercy and strictness?
Yeah, I was going
I'm a
to
little
take us
confused.
there as well, and I'm not going to answer, but I'm wondering is like, just by association, have you ever thought about maybe something, and does this remind you of some incident from your life where it's like maybe you're not even sure why it was reminded, and if it's something you would feel comfortable sharing in this circumstance, because our life experience can be wisdom to help sort out some of these things. You know, what is this pointing to?
I could,
Somebody typing? I hear typing.
I do hear typing, yes.
as I say, I
Um,
think I could share something. A number of months ago, my sister decided she didn't want to talk to me anymore. Supposedly, I did something, not knowing what I did, but I, accepted what she had to say, so she stopped talking to me. I had continued to um, send little messages every so often, especially during Pesach and other times, just wishing her well, not expecting anything back, but offering some kindness. Well, finally, just a couple of weeks ago, um, she actually called me and told me what she was upset at, and I never would have guessed what it was,
hmm,
and I still don't quite understand it, but I totally apologized for whatever it was.
hmm,
That, I'm sorry that you felt this way. This was not my intention. And if this is what I caused, you know, and, sometimes I really believe it, I might not have caused it. It's how she is interpreting or taking in. But if that would help, that's where the place is of using that skill, even if it's not something that I really did wrong, but I used the skill, and now we're talking again.
yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you, Chaya. I'm glad that there's been some repair there. That's wonderful. There was a story, and there's many ways that this could apply, and I'm so glad that you applied it in that way. I'm reminded of, I haven't taught a lot to college students, but one time I did, and I showed this, and one guy really resonated with it, and he said, "Oh, it's kind of like with my roommates, and like they're really messy, and they don't like clean up, and rather than saying, hey guys, I really need you to kind of put your socks away or whatever." He said, I didn't say anything, I didn't say anything, I didn't say anything. And then like I got so mad that I just kind of blew up at them. And um, and it could also kind of happen in a flavor where, so he's like, so because I didn't, and I'll use my vocabulary, but because he didn't set a boundary around behavior, it got to the point where, things blew up. And one could also imagine, a flavor of that where you become mad at the roommate, and then they come to you because they broke up with their romantic partner. And it's just like, and instead of kind of being there for them and being kind, you're all pissed off about this living situation. And so you give them the cold shoulder. You'd be like, oh man, that's rough. Sorry to hear it. And not really being there for them. Now, that's a made up example, but it's not kind of inconsistent with things that I've done in my life. I can't remember specific times when I've done that, but so it's, yeah, Sue.
I just wanted to say quickly, that's perfect. I understand it now. So thank you.
Sure. Does this kind of remind people of maybe times in their own life where they could have set more of a boundary and then things kind of got out of hand when maybe in hindsight they didn't need to get that far? Yeah, Paul.
Yeah, I forgot again this week what the shortcut is, and keyboard shortcut for raising hands. So I'm still trying to remember how to do that. Anyway, I find this to be very confusing and entirely dependent on context. So I could apply multiple contexts for what I think mercy means and what I think strictness would be, and then whether or not that determined in a deterministic way that I was going to be cruel as opposed to kindness. I suppose what the example that you provided is kind of makes sense. But again, if I'm thinking about it, my grandchild or my son, what is mercy? Is it just being very loose with the rules? I don't know. I mean, that's not what I would use as a definition of mercy, but that's kind of what it feels like this quote is referring to. So I find it to be ambiguous at best.
Yeah.
For me.
Thank you, Paul. And I hear that. And yeah, depending what I'm hearing you say is depending what definitions you plug into the different pieces, it could work or couldn't work. But it sounds like it's not resonating or helpful to you right now. Wendy.
All right. Well, this reminds me of somebody that's in a position to give advice, like a lawyer or a grant writer. You guys know I am a grant writer. So I had been put in this position just very recently. Okay, so I found something in financial document that had to be changed. And yeah, I met with a lot of resistance, but I did have to stand my ground and say, no, we cannot apply for this unless you change that. Because I knew in the end, I was going to go back to having to be cruel later on if I let them do it. And then the house comes tumbling down, and then I have to say, well, you're in trouble now because you didn't fix this. And so I'm just reminded, and lawyers, when they give a client advice and the client comes in and it's not a good picture, and they have to kind of say, you're going to lose. If they say, oh, you're going to win, and then they don't, that's just much more cruel. So I think it's a question of really stopping what you're doing and trying to get some understanding. And it's hard. It's not easy. So
Yeah.
that's my story. That
Well, thank
particular
you. What I
thing.
hear you is kind of bringing in, the sultry of truth as well. It's like sometimes, someone needs to hear an unpleasant truth. And it's like, oh, I'm going to be merciful and spare their feelings. Well, that may not go so well in the long run. Marianne.
So, my work, one of my jobs was said to come in tomorrow when have COVID and I'm still contagious. And I like, well, okay. But then I thought about it and I thought, and I set the boundary. I'm like, I'm not going to infect other people. That doesn't feel right to me, because then that would have made me feel I could already start feeling resentful towards this job and towards this person. So I think your idea, Greg, about setting boundaries is a good thing. Yeah. So thank you.
Welcome. Are you still sick now, or was this a while ago?
No, I'm still sick. I'm still, yeah, I'm better, but I'm still contagious.
No, sorry to hear
Do you want me to put a mask on?
that. I think maybe in an abundance of caution, that might be a little bit too much. So,
Okay.
but I'm glad you're on the mend, and I hope you continue to feel better. Sarah.
So I had to look up the word mercy, definition of mercy, and I found one that said mercy is the compassionate treatment of those in distress, especially when it is within one's power to punish or harm them. So it's sort of ambiguous to me. You know, I don't understand the part where it's within one's power to punish or harm them. I mean, I understood, Wendy, your example with the grant, that I could understand how if you didn't, didn't speak up and say it, it would be trouble later. But so the compassionate treatment of those in distress, I don't know, it's a little hard for me to wrap my head around also.
Yeah, there's a lot in that definition. I mean, it's reminding me, like, if someone is like, throws themselves on the mercy of the court, it's like, yeah, I did this thing and you could send me to jail for 30 years, but I'm going to plead for mercy and, don't send me to jail. And, someone, I mean, you could argue that if someone like doesn't have any kind of consequence for behavior, they might do it again. And other people might say, if you show them mercy, it will help them reform and get out of it. So,
well, it's almost like you're in a position to judge an act.
yeah, I think that's exactly what this quote is kind of getting at. Sometimes we need to make a choice between two paths.
Right.
Or,
yeah. And sort of turn your eye away or say, buddy.
Yeah.
Own up.
Yeah. And it's parenting dilemma too, all the time. What do you... Let's hear from Paul again, and then Karen.
Yeah, so I think the concept of having correct boundaries in place makes a lot of sense to me. I was Marianne, was that said that, or somewhere around? Yeah, just that makes a lot more sense in terms of if I'm in that position, if I were a judge in a courtroom, to have that kind of power over somebody, then it would really, maybe the boundary thing wouldn't be important. But being in a family situation, yes, then having good boundaries and knowing what would be, in the short run, good for me, but but in the long run, bad for my child. That's kind of the trade-off that I can see happening here. And that's where I need to be mindful, and that goes back then, I think, to a lot of the soul traits about where is my balance there in terms of having order, in terms of humility. How much room have I needed to take up in a certain space? Sometimes strictness is really just a matter of me wanting to have more room, right?
Mhm.
So that's not necessarily the right thing to do either. So
Yeah. Yeah, we're
Thanks.
jumping in with to the deep end of the pool today. This is a big one. Yeah. Thank you, Paul. Hey, Karen.
Hi. I don't think mercy at all is about giving people a free pass. I think it's just about recognizing that people are fallible. We all are.
Mm.
And so, what's the right course of action? It's not that there should be no course of action, and it's not that people shouldn't be held accountable, but it's like, are there extenuating circumstances? And that might not mean you get off scot-free, but it might mean a lesser discipline. It might be some type of education, community service, whatever it is. So when I always think of God tempers justice with mercy, it's not that we are vacating justice. It's that we're trying to make sure that the end result is kind of, I can't say that both sides are winners, but that where the difficulty is, we end up eventually with a better outcome. So that would be my thing about mercy, is that it's a word that should lead us to the best possible outcome, because no one is perfect.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Karen. Yeah, I mean, thinking about what is the ultimate outcome that we want to achieve is I think the kind of deliberation that we're looking for. I see Toby's hand. We'll go to Toby and then to Wendy.
Well, I've been sitting here listening to all this courtroom talk, and I guess I have to jump in, being a criminal defense lawyer for 20 years, and doing death penalty cases. When you get a client, and I was a public defender, so I didn't get to pick my clients. They were assigned to me. I had no choice. If it came on my desk, I had to handle it. But what is in serious cases, all serious cases, at least in Arizona, we try to present what we call mitigating evidence, which is pretty much what Karen was talking about. Reasons that the judge or jury, if it's a jury, should not give the maximum sentence. And a lot of times it had to do with the way this person grew up, a mental health problems, drug and alcohol addiction, which of course could cut both ways. But all of those things were reasons that the judge could hang his or her hat on giving a lesser sentence. And when you talk to a client, I had some pretty terrible ones, but they're looking at the death penalty in Arizona, and we still kill people here. So the idea was to get the best possible outcome. I never had a client who walked, not in a death case. There was always overwhelming evidence that they were the person, in fact, who committed the crime. But it was about getting the best outcome, not eliminating punishment, but more tempered towards appropriate justice.
Thank you. Thank you, Toby. So let's see, I think we had Wendy who was up next.
I tried to take my hand down between Paul and Karen and Toby. They said it. I don't need to talk.
And Karen, I see your hand is still up. Is there something else you wanted to add? Okay. All right, well, let's go a little bit deeper. Now that we're all warmed up. So we looked at some of these definitions last week of Chesed, and I wanted to add one more from Tamar Ashkenazi. Could somebody read this first bullet, please?
Often translated as loving kindness, Chesed refers to acts of benevolence that one does out of kindness, not out of any obligation.
Thank you. Thanks, Gil. Nice to see you. Thanks for joining us again. Yeah, so for me, the word that jumps out for this is obligation. You know, out of kindness, not out of obligation. So what's that duality all about?
I think in what I was talking about was, it was my heart that was talking to my sister, not that I had, not that I had to explain or say, what were you talking about? Or what did you think I said? Or whatever, just simply accepting that, okay, she's opening to talking to me. And so what I will do is, gracefully accept whatever it is that she felt as that was her feeling. So I'm just, I don't know what it was.
Yeah.
But letting it go that way is to me that way of kindness and mercy of, okay, I'll accept what you say.
Right. As opposed to, this is my sister, I have to have a relationship with her, I have to kind of do this for the sake of whatever. It's sort of like, no, this was your heart that was leading you to action. Beautiful. Thank you. Martin.
Yeah, I think obligation may be an external source of motivation, whereas the other would be internal source.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Thank you. Wendy.
Well, I just have a question. Because that word obligation, that jumped out at me too. And I was thinking, maybe it's just me, but I don't ever feel obligated because I always feel like I have a choice. But maybe obligation goes a little bit beyond that or something. But I always feel like we have dues for temple, but we love to pay the dues, and I don't feel obligated because I feel like I could not do that. But then I guess taxes, I suppose, is something that is an obligation. But I even feel good about paying those. I don't know. Maybe I just don't look at it the same way. But
yeah, so you don't sort of perceive some of these things, which might on paper be an obligation, but for you, it's like, well, I don't have to be a member. I don't have to do this. Thank you, Marianne, and then Sue.
I guess I don't see them as being diametrically opposed. For instance, my father is very ill, and I feel that I have an obligation because he's my father to go up and visit him and wipe his bottom and feed him. And I do that because I have an obligation. And I love him. So I don't think I'm thinking, oh, I'm so kind to do this. So I do a lot of things. I give money out of obligation because I believe in economic justice. And so I really don't agree with the dichotomy. It doesn't work for me, I should say. It just doesn't work for me. Thanks.
Yeah, like some of these things, it can get really gray. It's like, what's taking care of a sick parent and doing some very intimate kind of, care. Is it obligation? Is it chesed? It's hard to know. But I think like from an intellectual standpoint, you reminded me of something, and I'm not saying this to refute like what you said at all. It's just like an example that's in the Talmud where it says that chesed is superior to tzedakah for 4 reasons. And one of them is giving to tzedakah. That is an obligation. We are expected, according to the traditional practice, to give between 10 and 20% of our income to a charity to support people in need. And so that's sort of obligatory giving, which is distinct from, you know, I see a homeless person and I'm just moved to support them by giving them a little food or some money. Well, they also say that Chesed, you can give your time, you can give things other than money, you know, besides charity. So, but I think your point is well taken, that it's not like it's a cut and dry thing, you know, and you know, we present things as a dichotomy to spark conversation and thought, not to say that they're actually a dichotomy. Maybe they are, maybe they're not. Sometimes maybe, other times not. So hear from Sue and then Karen.
So what I keep thinking about is that Hesed to me is acts of loving kindness and love and heart. And I think a couple people have mentioned that already, but the whole idea that when you think of an obligation, you don't think of something that you're doing with your heart, with your love. There's an emotional kind of attachment in that way. And then I also think of, I love Gimilut Hasadim is one of my favorite terms. It's acts of loving kindness. So there's always loving in the right, and Gimilut Hasadim and in Hesed, which is different, but I mean, similar is, so I don't know. I mean, you could be obligated through love, I suppose, but I don't think of it that way. I don't think of that as an obligation. I think of that as an act of love.
So I have a story to tell about that, but I will, because it's a question, you know, is the acts of love, do we need to feel like loving when we're doing that? Or can it still be an act of love if we're just doing it? But let's hear from Karen first.
So for me, I always thought the difference between kindness and chesed was that people can do what they think is a kind act, but that chesed takes it a step further in terms of making sure that the person that we are doing a kindness for, that they're going to see that, because we might think we're doing something nice for them and it may be something that upsets them for whatever reason. And in terms of obligation or not for kindness, I don't know that it really matters if you get this, if you get a benefit from both. Like, I think that we can benefit from acts of kindness just because we feel an inner compulsion to do good, and an act of kindness that we're obligated to do. I would think that sometimes, if I think of examples for myself, that I get a benefit from either one, you know, that I feel good about doing both of them. One of them might be more of an obligation because I hadn't thought to do it before. And somebody said, yeah, this is something that I don't like that, you know, that you should do, that you may want to do. Or I decided that that's something that I'm going to do that I might not have wanted to do otherwise. But it may be an obligation, but it also may feel like something that I want to do. I think there's.
Yeah, absolutely. It's again not a full, you know, what I'm hearing is it's not a full dichotomy, and like, well, where is the line? You know, comforting mourners, you know, is that an obligation? It's an act of chesed. It's also kind of an obligation. It's also really uncomfortable sometimes to go to the Shiva house, but it's something we're people of doing, something we're expected to do. And so we got, all right, we got a full lineup. So we're gonna go switch the speed round a little bit, just so we have enough time for breakout groups. So let's see, Wendy, you're up first, and then
Okay, I promise. Tzedakah, that was perfect, because I'm thinking of the kids in a tzedakah box. And yes, it's an obligation, and they know that, and then they get that coin and they run to that, and that's their heart. And then when it's full and we open it up, it's even better. It just was always glorious, counting up and where are we going to give it. So I guess it could be both, just like Karen's talking about. Yeah, no dichotomy, like Mariana said, not really.
Thank you. Bonnie.
So some of you know who live in my area that I do a lot of fundraising for different nonprofits. It became very clear to me when I went back to grad school. I went to the University of Judaism. I was 34 with two young children. I was 12 years younger than everyone in the older than everyone in the program. And I was on a full scholarship for 3 years. And it really, my parents had paid for college for me, and the state of New Jersey paid for my first master's. But here at university was giving me 3 years of a scholarship, and it really made a difference for me. And so I've really jumped in over the last 40 years into fundraising. And I love doing face-to-face meetings. I don't care if it's on Zoom. I don't care if it's on FaceTime. I don't care if it's on chat. I don't care if it's across the table with a cup of coffee. And when the person, whether they make the gift or not, when we have ended the conversation, I say thank you, and thank you for doing a mitzvah by considering this, and thank you for letting me do a mitzvah by asking you. And somebody did that with me, and it made such a difference for me that I've put that into the way I end a meeting. Would I like them to make the gift right then and there and tell me what it is? Sure. But if they're willing to consider it, it's in the checkoff category. Yeah. So that's where both of those work for me. Is it an obligation for me? Yes. I really feel I need to pay back the Jewish world. But it's also because I love it. So I don't know if that helps the discussion.
Well, thank you for sharing from your heart, Bonnie. Paul.
Yeah, so I think that was a wonderful segue into what I was just thinking about and pondering, which is that if I'm seeing an obligation as an expectation, either expected of me or that I'm expecting something to come out of this, if there's expectation involved, then I think that is where things can get very messy, tangled, and unclear. But to Bonnie's point, by saying just by meeting, you did a mitzvah, is basically releasing somebody, from that set of expectations, which gives them a sense of, okay, so I'm free to choose, basically, and Bonnie's not going to think I'm an asshole if I don't make the donation. Just that the fact that I listened, it's part of the process, and I appreciate that. So pulling expectation out of that mess of things that, for me anyway, can be part of this obligation versus kindness helps an awful lot.
Thank you, Paul. And as you were talking, and I was thinking about what Bonnie said and what you were saying, what's really powerful about that example is that when we talk about Chesed or charity or doing good stuff, we sometimes go to the big thing. The big thing is writing the check or writing the big check. And the small things are more important, in my opinion. The small things come up all the time. And so helping people realize that the thing they did by listening and by giving you a chance to make an ask and explain the organization, whatever, is also a mitzvah. And I think it helps people kind of live into, align with Jewish living, in a way that's much more profound, in my opinion, than whether or not they write a check. Marianne.
I'll try to make this really short. When we were talking about Chesed, it seemed that people were talking a lot about feeling a good feeling to do something, but I guess the way may not make a lot of sense, but the way I've always defined love is a decision. Love's a decision that I act on. So there's not necessarily feeling involved. So just wanted to say that.
Thank you. And that reminds me of the story that I was going to tell. And I've told this story before, so apologies if you've heard it before, but maybe it'll be just one of those great stories that you can hear again and again. We'll see. But when I was, at one point, I was working on Chesed, and it was probably one of the first times that I'd kind of gone through the cycle. And an email came from one of the rabbis at the synagogue that said, we need volunteers to go to Home and Hope, which was housing unhoused people at the synagogue for a time. And we needed someone to kind of go and talk with them and, hang out and help with dinner. And so I am just so profoundly uncomfortable about doing that. But I'm like, geez, I'm working on Hesed, you know, taking care of the poor is part of that picture. So I did it. And I went, and I was pretty uncomfortable the whole time, but I showed up and I smiled and I was as kind as I could be. And it's by taking, and that's part of the Mussar journey too. It's taking action, because when we do that, I am trying to get further down the road and to develop my Chesed muscle, because it's about doing it. And I know some people here are familiar with 12-step programs, and sometimes you got to fake it till you make it. Or as my Hebruta likes to say, you got to fake it until you awake it.
How did you feel after?
I felt really uncomfortable. I would love to say I felt, wow, it was great, this great thing. But I'm just like, oh my God, I'm so glad that's over. I mean, I'm just being real with you. I mean, it's really was kind of where I was at. And but I also felt good on another level because I showed up. It was like I was there for people who needed me to be there. And it didn't. And so if I felt a little uncomfortable, that's a small price to pay to try to give some comfort to people who, and this, I had Google Translate out, and the mom didn't speak any English, and the daughter spoke both English and Spanish, and she just laughed every time I would say something, and then the phone would translate it into Spanish. And that was really special. So, okay, we have Toby and Haya, but I got to ask you guys to be super quick because I want to get us to breakout rooms.
What you did is called an exposure experiment in cognitive behavioral therapy. Just so you know, I'm very familiar with that. And it oftentimes is a revelation, whatever you feel afterwards. It's a feeling of accomplishment. So whatever happened, good job.
Yeah, and that's, I can be truthful with myself. I'm not proud of it. Some people are first in line and do that all the time, and I think that's wonderful. And maybe someday I'll be one of those people. But if I don't ever try, I won't be. Hiya.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that interesting, because what you brought up just now, really I could feel it because I'm an election judge. And being an election judge means I go and I, help people, and record, register them. Or right now we're working in nursing homes. We're going to nursing homes and helping people. And, I find myself kind of going, some judgment, because they really are having some, I mean, it's like, I don't even know why they're voting, because I don't know that they even know what they're voting for. But then I have to stop and say, but they want to do this. And I'm here to give them that place to do it. And so it's not always about doing something that you feel good about, but that that you're offering something to somebody else.
And that's kind of supporting someone else without any reward. That is the Chesed journey. Okay, well, I'm sorry we're a little squeezed once again on the breakout rooms, but that's okay. So this is a story about Rabbi Rosenstein, who was greeted so warmly when he arrived at this yeshiva that he thought that the people had met him before. And it was like, no, they just really were kind of Hamish and Menchie and warm and loving in that way. And so he learned the mitzvah of greeting all people with a warm smile. And this is from Rabbi David Jaffe from the IGS Tikkun Midot curriculum. So with your partner, given that greeting people warmly can have such a positive impact, what might hold you back from that? What might hold you back? I could look and say, what was holding me back from doing, what was making me so uncomfortable about that situation, and what soul traits were in play there. But just for something a little easier, perhaps, for giving warm greetings to people. So percolate on that a little bit while I set up the breakout rooms. Okay, the rooms are open. So we'll have about 6 minutes. Hey, welcome back, everyone. So, how did that go? Would anyone care to share an insight that they had, or something that you talked about?
I'll talk. In my group, none of us had problems with this particular thing, but we recognize that other people do.
Hmm.
And that's the hardest part, is reaching out to people who don't make eye contact and
Hmm.
don't go out of their way to connect with you. I think Jewish people, as Chaya said, tend to be a little bit more touchy-feely and have less of a problem with reaching out and saying our names, but it's hard when we deal with people who can't do that.
Thank you, Janet. Karen.
I greet basically by reading the room and, the people that I pass by. If somebody looks deep in thought, I'm not going to startle them or interrupt them. And I also think that, if somebody's not warm and friendly outright, I don't know that they have to be. I don't need to bring them out, because as I mentioned before about Chesed, I think the kindness is recognizing where other people are. And if it's kind for them to not be hi or wave or, good morning, passing them by because they're just doing their own thing, or they might, be intimidated by people, might have an issue with the voice, then I just wouldn't do that. So when people say hello to me, I'll say hello back, but I may not say hello first because I'm not sure that you want to respond. You want to respond, and I don't think other people have to be like me if I'm feeling more friendly at that moment.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of recognizing if we're being friendly, is that something that makes the other person comfortable or not?
Yeah, it's all about, bearing the burden of the other. It's about doing things for the sake of supporting other people. My daughter kind of got us into the show The Bear, which we've been watching. We just finished season 1, and I won't go into the whole thing, but at one point he goes to an Al-Anon meeting and someone was talking, and they said this phrase that really stood out for me. It's like, well, I need to keep my side of the street clean. It's like someone else, if they're going to respond or not, that's their side of the street. As hard as that can be sometimes, it's like, well, I can control my side of the street. I'm going to keep that as clean as I can. Marianne.
Yeah, I like this question. It made me realize a weakness I have, and that is like for now I've been trying to get a hospital bed through Medicare for my father, and I get, you can imagine the red tape and all the different organizations I have to go to and doctors, and I can get a little curt, I realized. I thought about it. So that, I think I have to work on that. So that's not greeting somebody nicely. So thank you for that question.
You're welcome. Gil, is that your hand, or are you just resting your head there?
No, I'm just resting my head,
Oh.
I
but
think you should tell them, Gil, what we discussed, because it was great. I was going to mention it.
oh, okay. So what we're talking about is from Sue was talking about being in the Midwest, moving from the East Coast, and I spent some time in the Midwest, and how people greet you more warmly in certain parts of the country. And then that the thing that sort of limits me from greeting people warmly is if I get distracted. So if I walk in and I'm not quite sure if I'm in the right room, or I'm not sure, or I'm thinking about something, then it might slip my mind. And then Sue mentioned that if it's somebody suspicious, that she is reluctant to say something. And I told a story about somebody sitting in a synagogue who just didn't look like they were supposed to be there. A young person, shorts, baseball cap backwards. And I said, my tendency is to get over my anxiety and fear and go up to the person and greet them warmly to figure out, just to do that, and also to figure out why they're there. And it turned out that this was the son of a woman who was going to be giving a talk, and he had just come in to watch her, and he had been a member of the synagogue for a long time as a family. But so overcoming that initial anxiety, and then always keeping in mind the possibility that even though somebody doesn't look like it's somebody that you would connect with, you don't know until you actually try.
Thank you, Gil. Well, we're going to give you the last word. Oh, Toby, you get a very quick last word, but then we got.
Sometimes you don't even need to talk to somebody. I was practicing kavod, and one of the kabbalat was to talk to people, to everyone, to greet everyone. And I couldn't. I'm kind of an introvert, and I found it very difficult to do that. So I started just by smiling at people, and I was very surprised to find that many of them, almost all of them, smile back, which was very gratifying. Anyway, thanks.
Thank you, Toby. Great example of just taking where you are and taking a step forward. So we'll just do a quick 5-second meditation. Put a deep breath in and a leisurely exhale. I'm in a moment of gratitude for everyone in this community for walking on this journey together. So when you're ready, you may open your eyes. Thank you all so much for being here. We have more chesed to do, so we're going to go into a third week according to our new protocol, where we will go for 2-ish weeks, but there's definitely some interesting things we didn't get to today. So some of them will get slotted in as we hit the other soul traits, but I think we're building a good foundation here, and let's keep building it. So